And then perfect. And I will pass it over to K-12 Insights amazing Chief Customer Officer, Krista Coleman.
Hi and welcome. Can everyone see the main screen that Isabella is sharing? If you can give me a thumbs up, I can see all of your faces. Good. Awesome. Thank you and welcome. So excited to have all of you here today. I was just sharing with the panelists right before you came how awesome it is that you get an hour for you. That's all about you, questions you are interested in, and things that I think will be really important to share. I am Krista Coleman. I'm the Chief Customer Officer for K-12 Insight, and I'm going to be your moderator today. I'm really honored to have really 4 special panelists that are joining us today. On the left, you'll see Dr. Steve Joel. I'm not sure where he's going to be on your screen, but he's that handsome guy in that nice black jacket there. He's a former superintendent of Lincoln Public Schools, and he's going to be really giving us the national perspective here today. Welcome, Steve. And then you'll see on the screen, the next one is Dr. Christy Somerville-Midgett. We're going to call her Dr. Midgett today throughout the webinar. She's the Vice President-elect, our Division Superintendent for Brunswick County Public Schools. Thank you for being here and welcome. And then you have Micah Schwartz coming from a legal perspective today. We thought that would be a nice option to add a legal perspective to some of the questions and answers we're talking about today. Micah Schwartz, just called you Michael. Micah Schwartz is the counsel from Williams Mullen. Welcome, Micah. And then Dr. Marcus Newsom. He's not anybody I need to really introduce to all of you, but he is going to kick us off. He's the VTLA director, VAS, and we just want to let him kind of kick off and kind of set the tone for the webinar that we put together for you today. Thank you, Dr. Newsom.
Good morning. Well, thank you, Krista. Good morning to all of you, and thank you for joining us today. As I shared when we were planning this session, that it seems like we believe in no webinar left behind, and so for you to choose this time with us this morning is very special. We began this conversation last year when VAS was planning for its professional development activities, and we identified 2 key areas that we think superintendents are really facing today. One is what at the time was called learning loss, and then the other is this issue of building trust with superintendents and school boards and communities. Things seem to have gone off the rail over the last few years. And one of the primary reasons that superintendents leave their job before they intend to is because of school boards and school board relationships. And so this is in keeping with our focus of superintendent retention this year. We need you on your job. Your community needs you. Our students need you. And so hopefully today, this discussion will provide some insights and perspectives of how we can better work with our communities, work with our school boards to build the type of trust that would produce the longevity that we all hope to experience in our jobs. So with that, Krista, I'm going to turn it back over to you and look forward to our session today.
Awesome.
Oh, Krista, by the way, I did forget one important thing was to thank you and K-12 Insight. Without you, this would not be made possible. And you have spent a lot of time and a lot of resources helping to organize this session today. So I want to share a special thank you to you and Isabel and Suhail and all of your team members from K-12 Insight.
Oh, thank you. We are excited and definitely happy to support you. Well, we will kick it off with our first question. We're going to talk about a time when each of our panelists were able to build trust with their board or community during a difficult situation. And we're going to just kick it off with Dr. Joel from a national perspective.
Hey, good morning, everyone. What a real pleasure to be with you. I get to do a shout out, good friend Eli Bracey. Great to see you on the webinar. You could probably have this same conversation with a lot of folks as well, too. Thanks to K-12 Insight and reconnecting with Marcus Newsom from years ago was awesome as well. I have to tell you that I'm a recovering superintendent for 37 years, last 12 in Lincoln. I've lived what you're living, and I tip my hat to you. This is a time right now where superintendents absolutely have to dig in and continue to carry the message that education matters, it's important. And I do believe, and this has been my message in a couple of other states when I've had a chance to speak, I do believe we're going to get back to relishing public education again, as opposed to it being in the literal crosshairs of national politics. Having said that, I believe very strongly that every one of us, the longer we're in this business, the more we're going to realize that there are several pivot points that occur that give us a chance to stand up for kids, stand up for education, lead our community, lead our board. Everybody has a story like that, including those that are even just starting out. For me, first year superintendent, Lincoln, Nebraska, at the end of the first year, birds chirping, sun shining, a disgruntled reading recovery teacher burned down the district office, and we lost absolutely everything. Lincoln was not an easy place to come into. The superintendent before me did not have a successful run. And so I was out trying to prove myself, but I can tell you when that kind of an event occurs and you get a chance to stand up and say, school's going to start on time, I promise you, even though I didn't know what I was saying at the time, it just marshaled all the forces in Lincoln, internally and externally. The community rallied behind the school district. The school board gave me emergency powers, first time ever in Nebraska, and was met with resistance by the conservative business community that, I had the ability to just go spend $500 million on anything I wanted. And I can tell you the board came together in a very, very strong way. So did my team. And we'll forever have that couple of years together that we went through and we fought through. And it was just a wonderful time. And, there's many more, but I would just tell you, think about those opportunities. And when you're confronted with them, lean into them, because that's a chance for you to establish or reestablish great trust in the community. And where does it pay off? When groups like these people that are coming to school board meetings today, including in Lincoln, that call for resignations or, call you things that are just very, very disingenuous and horrible, their community will have you back, as will the Board of Education.
Thanks, Dr. Joel. Great answer. We're going to move over to our beautiful Dr. Somerville Majette. You're up next.
All right. Probably very similar to Dr. Joel. It was my first day here in Brunswick County. And I say the date specifically because of July 7th, 2018. And on my first day on the job and the 7th day in the fiscal year, I discovered in looking at that fiscal year's budget that we were $948,000 in the hole. There were some miscalculations with the state aid template that previous spring when they set the budget, and it wasn't discovered until I came in on my first day. So with that and trying to build trust, I hadn't had my first official meeting with my board or the Board of Supervisors, which quickly happened. From there was also a community action group who had been monitoring the school division's use of funding, their spending, and then as well as the county spending. It was called the Better Brunswick Government, sort of like a community watch group. So from there, of course, to build that trust, I'm coming in saying that, oh yeah, I'm seeing this deficit, but the board, they're just getting to know me, went through an interview process, but we're newly married and there's no honeymoon period. So from there, I did bring in 2 consultants to take a look, double check behind me, make sure that I'm accurate, because that was just sort of a quick assessment on that day. But from there, it became, we really had to jump in there together and have like that full transparency, realizing that my board didn't have a good understanding of the budget, of what they needed to know. And Board of Supervisors, they were not as receptive initially because they had questioned the school division spending of the money as well and how things were handled. So from there, we created several fact sheets, had several community meetings. We met with the Board of Supervisors and my board twice a month, county administrator every single week. but really just being very transparent about where we were in that process and continuously providing that information out to the community really helped us. We were kind of forced to bond quickly, but it really helped us work through that difficult situation and make sure that everyone had that understanding of where we were. So that was my opportunity to really build trust in the Brunswick community.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And we'll wrap it up with Dr. Newsom. I can imagine you've got several you could probably share over your tenure, and just such a wealth of knowledge, just as we've been meeting over the last couple of weeks. But can you tell us a specific time where you were able to build trust with your board or your community?
Sure. Thank you. Well, first, I was proud of the 16 years I served as superintendent, but it pales when I heard Steve Joel mention he was a superintendent for 37 years. So that's quite an accomplishment, Steve. But for me, I would say that building trust is like making deposits in a bank account. And the more deposits you make, then during times of stress and times of conflict, then you have reserves that you can pull from. We all have critical situations throughout our tenure. It's not how we lead during good times; it's how we lead during challenging times. And you've heard two great examples, and I'd just like to add a third example. And for me, it also centered around budget. And the reason I use this one is because this caused me to be front page, top of the fold on the Richmond Times-Dispatch for 4 days out of 5 because I was going into my third year as superintendent. And the first 2 years, your community may give you a break, but when it's the third year and beyond, every issue they put pin on the superintendent. It's your problem then. And so we went into this Great Recession. And while no one in our school division caused it, it became my problem. And our budget was cut by $60 million. Panic just went throughout the school system. It went throughout the community, and people were just paralyzed. What are we going to do next? And all eyes were on me. That's what happens during times of crisis. People look to the leaders to protect them. How was I going to build the trust? We had about 7,500 employees, and I met with every employee. If it wasn't individually, I met with them in groups. And it was a time for me to connect with them, to hear their fears, to be transparent with them, to share a plan moving forward. I met with community leaders. I met with members of the media, with the business community, elected officials, and I answered every tough question. And I faced it head on with transparency, with empathy, with humility. But I also had to demonstrate to them that everyone would have to make a sacrifice, and the sacrifice would start with the leadership. At the time, it didn't seem like a big deal to me, but I asked the board to reduce my salary by 7%. Again, I had no idea of how it would resonate with the community. They felt like their leader was making a personal sacrifice. And then our leadership team took the next biggest hit in terms of salary cuts. That really demonstrated that we were all in this together. We were all feeling the same pain. And it didn't hurt that I had an efficiency audit conducted, and the audit revealed that not only did we not have fat in the budget, which is the first thing people say, you have fat in your budget. I hate that phrase. But the audit revealed that we not only did not have fat in the budget, even before the budget cuts, we were underfunded as a school division. And I think that silenced many of our critics. And in doing so, I think it went a long way to building trust moving forward for the next 7 or 8 years that I served in the school division.
Wow, I hate that term too, especially females really hate that term. Well, thank all of you. Just great responses for each one. And what a different, it burned down an entire building. That really sets the tone, right, for where we are even today, that was happening when you first started, Dr. Joel. We're going to move to our next question. As we all know, misinformation and rumors are probably at the top of your concerns, right? Especially when, you message something and by the time it goes through that rumor mill and all of those Facebook groups, you're like, how in the world did it actually get translated and transposed to this? So we're going to start with you, Dr. Somerville Majette. How do you manage, that misinformation and that rumor mill when it happens?
Well, I think for us, first, we generally try to evaluate the source of the misinformation. As a small school division, we don't have a communications officer, so a lot of the information that goes out is coming from us and our team. And we try to look at, did we communicate it clearly? Did we avoid all of that educational ease that we put out there when we're talking to colleagues, and looking at being able to look at our community and make sure they can understand the information that we're putting out in a way that they understand. So that's usually our first step in doing that. And when the information comes out, misinformation, we try to handle it properly. We put out information that's easy to read, easy to understand. Oftentimes we have a Brunswick Education Association it's comprised of teachers, staff, and some parents and community members. And if there are any topics of something that is just not really clear, we generally will go through them to serve as, while we can put things on social media, we put things on our website, we send out school messenger alert, text, we communicate things at board meetings. We often understand that here, word of mouth is everything. So if we can get to those key stakeholders and make sure that they understand that information, it makes it much easier to get it out there and making sure that it's clear. You mentioned rumors, and I would say, as far as rumors are concerned, I do not address every single rumor. I feel like you will be running around chasing that all day. We do listen to the rumors and see, does it rise to the level of something that we need to evaluate? Is it impacting what we're doing with our instructional day with kids? Does it impact our overall operations? But if it doesn't, and it doesn't rise to that level, it's almost like, hey, I put it in my pocket. If it comes up again, then I may address it. But if it's something that doesn't really rise to the level, we don't have the time or staff to chase all of those things.
Yeah, I can imagine. That could be awfully consuming, especially in today's age. Dr. Newsome, anything to add to that?
Sure. A couple of strategies that we used. When I was in Chesterfield, we created a program called the Chesterfield Ambassadors Program, where we targeted leaders in the community, and we put them in an 8-week program where they met once a week for 8 weeks. We would bring them in. They would get to learn about the central office, learn about the issues of the school district. We would put them on school buses. They had the opportunity to tour the schools. Many of our community critics are people who haven't been in a school in 30, 40 years. And so this was a great opportunity for them. And then we also, and so they became ambassadors for the school district. We also had an initiative called Key Communicators, where we identified about 600 key leaders in our community. And we made them our key communicators, where we would push information out through them. People who own businesses, people who were members of various organizations, fraternities, sororities, Lions clubs, Rotary, and so forth. And so we actually communicated a great deal through them. I was fortunate in Chesterfield. We had the ability for me to host a monthly television program where I was able to interview members of our school division students to get information out. And then lastly, I would like to focus on what most of us do, and that's social media. But what we try to do with social media was to have it serve as our go-to for, we see on the local news, we often see this phrase called breaking news. And so the breaking news would come from our school division. Whenever there was inclement weather and families wanted to know if we were going to close school or delay school, before we sent anything to the media, we would put it on our social media, and we trained our community to go to the school division social media to realize that they were going to get information. So if there was a critical incident, if there were a fire or something that happened in the school, we would put it out first. Then the media would get it next. And so I think that was very important. And the last thing I'd like to say about our social media, there was a time where we had on our home web page a feature called Mythbusters. And there were rumors and myths that would come up from time to time from members of the media. More often than not, it came internally from members of the staff. And we would actually post the statement, the misconception or the myth, and then beside it, we would state fact. And we felt it was a way of setting the record straight for a lot of the misinformation that was going out.
Love the Mythbusters. Great idea. Dr. Joel, I know you are a big fan too of having, if you needed to, go to the TV and radio and social media as well. Can you share a little bit about how you managed it?
Well, very, very similar to my colleagues, but I will tell you that this became more and more of a time consumer for us as we headed into the pandemic. And for me, the very first thing I did was make sure that we had the best communications team in place, because we were going to have to control the message. I mean, ultimately, when you think about how the school is perceived, it's really about how the message is being received. So we went on the offensive and we started putting out lots of information. I had a community advisory leadership group, very, very similar to Dr. Newsom. And we use K-12 Insight a lot to dispel rumors, because most of you, I'm sure, are familiar with K-12 Insight. That's an opportunity for people to be in touch with us about questions that they have. And as we were heading into or post a board meeting where a claim would be made by a non-parent about a curriculum issue or something like that, we would make sure that K-12 Insight, we use K-12 Insight to make sure that we get the right information out. We also, if it became extreme, we put on our website a Q&A. We formed a Facebook Live where I was on before every single school board meeting, along with a board member. We addressed rumors and innuendos, and it became rather tiresome. What we realized in Lincoln were that the people that were creating that were trying to create the turmoil, the Moms for Liberty group, didn't even have kids in our school system. And so, we sort of went after them a little bit. And, I don't recommend that. But I was in the last year I knew I was going. And so I take great pride in what I'm about to tell you. For years and years and years, probably since the beginning of public education, public forum, we never interacted with the public, right? We just took it, and as long when we were wearing masks, it was a little bit easier because they couldn't see our facial expressions. But when the mask came off, it was difficult because we're live on TV, and believe it or not, lots of people pop popcorn and watch school board meetings in Lincoln. And one of the things that I said to the board, because the board was just getting very weary, they didn't sign up to be yelled at and have fingers pointed at them. One of the things that I said is, okay, let's go on the offensive. So we began about 6 months before I retired. The frequent flyer group that would come in and say they heard something on Fox News, they heard something, on their various websites. If we knew that it was complete misinformation, rumor, and innuendo, and if it came from somebody who wasn't even a parent in our school, we would let them get off the podium. And then I would bring on a staff member or myself, and we would dispel the rumor right there. And I have to tell you, it ticked them off to no end. They had to rethink their strategy, because they were counting on the fact that whatever base they were trying to create was listening to them, and we were not interacting. And the Board of Education really enjoyed that. In a way that just gave them a chance to set the record straight. Things like, for example, I remember one woman came up, the problem with Lincoln Public Schools is that you banned all Bibles from all schools. Well, very, very quickly, I texted my director of library. She had a picture of the stacks at one of the high school, and she gave me a number. Every one of our schools had a Bible in the library. And this woman was so mad at us for she said embarrassing her is what she said the next 2 weeks when she came back, but I loved it. So I would just say we have to go on the offensive. I used radio and TV. There were a lot of guest editorials. Like Marcus, I spoke to civic groups repeatedly. When I'll stop on this one. When the heat gets the hottest, as a superintendent, you have to be more visible, even if it's uncomfortable. The public needs to see you. Krista said it before. You never sweat in public. Show confidence. Show strength. And that vast majority of people, 90 to 95% of the people, staff members included, are going to be very, very supportive of the strength of your leadership.
Oh, I love that. Micah, this is a great time to bring you in.
Yeah, I
because
appreciate that. Yeah, Dr. Joel talking about going on the offensive. I think that is a good time for me to jump in. So good morning, everyone. I'm Micah Schwartz. I'm the vast legal counsel, and I also represent a handful of school boards. And I'm a lawyer, so I'm going to be giving the legal perspective this morning. I'm thinking when it comes to misinformation and rumors, or at least what I'm going to be focusing on, is when the misinformation or the rumors are about you as an individual, right, in your role as a superintendent, and what you can do about it within the bounds of the law. So we have the concept generally of free speech in this country, right? And you all are government officials, so it applies meaningfully to you. There is a expectation that citizens, parents, even non-parents can speak freely about the division or even about you as superintendents in a public forum, for instance, including at a school board meeting. But there are bounds to that. I mean, the law sets rules for how people can operate in society. And so balancing on one side of the ledger is free speech, but on the other is the right to not be defamed. So I want to focus on defamation in particular. So if somebody comes to a board meeting or is writing an article and they are intentionally saying something about you that is false, it may be defamation. Now, since you are public officials, the bar is higher. What is referred to as the New York Times standard, which is the name of a case that involved the New York Times. For you to be defamed as public figures, as opposed to someone else who isn't a public figure, you have to show not only that the statements that were made about you were false, but that they were intentionally false, or at least that the person who said them acted with reckless disregard toward the truth. And that's a high bar, especially since an opinion can neither be true nor false. So if somebody comes to a board meeting and says you're doing a terrible job, I think you're doing a terrible job as superintendent, that's that person's opinion. It can't be. It's a matter of opinion. It can't be right or wrong. On the other hand, if they say you're embezzling and they know it's not true, then that's defamatory. It hurts your reputation. It can have a professional impact on you. They know it's false. That can be the basis for a legal claim. And I mentioned that not because I think you would actually be inclined to bring a lawsuit, but rather because it might be an opportunity to brush that person back from the plate. Probably not at the board meeting itself, but afterwards, maybe with the help of your legal counsel, to just remind that person, you've got rules you have to follow here too. Another piece of this that I just wanted to mention is it goes in the other direction too, which means you can defame other people in fighting back, right? So be careful with the personal attacks about people who come to board meetings, because the fire can be directed towards you as well, and you don't have that high bar. Meaning, somebody who's making a claim against you for defamation doesn't have to show that it was intentional or reckless. If they're not a public figure, it just has to be that it was false, and you should have known it was false. Thanks, Krista.
really, really helpful. And I do want to mention too, even as we talk about personal attacks or even attacks or accusations that are not true about your school district, one of the things that we have noticed with our superintendents right now is they are using the data similar to what Dr. Joel shared that they're getting in Let's Talk. So they're able to walk into some of these board meetings prepared with pictures because they know what's coming, having that sneak peek of what people are talking about and being able to really attack it at that, what we call that whisper stage before it becomes a crisis. You can proactively defend yourselves by knowing some of the things that are being talked about in the community. And I know that's what so many of our superintendents are leveraging right now, the data that's coming in, the questions that are being asked. They're getting a trend and understanding, like watching this trend and seeing, oh, this is going to be a problem. So they proactively prepared with things like pictures, like Dr. Joel shared, and proof of the things that they are doing that are exactly opposite of those rumors. So there is a way you can pre-prepare for some of those tough board meetings when you have access to that type of information. All right, we're going to move to our question number 3. Just share a few systems, right, or processes you put in place to promote effective and efficient communication with your board. We all know that when the two of us are working together, meaning our school district as an entity and our school board as an entity, and especially with the superintendent having the support of their school boards, for those of you who do, and those of you who don't even know the penalty of that, even more so, right? So what systems or processes, and I think I'll start with Dr. Newsome on this one, did you put in place to kind of promote that effective and efficient communication with your board?
Sure, thank you. I'm going to try to be brief because I really enjoy hearing from my colleagues, but most superintendents, we provide weekly updates about what's going on, and so I don't want to spend any real time with that. And we send out lots of communication, and unfortunately, a lot of it is not read or reviewed by our school board members. But I think it's essential for superintendents to spend time with individual board members. I know most of you probably do that. You meet on a regular schedule with individual board members, or 2 by 2. I always did that with my board, but I would say when I got to Petersburg as superintendent, board members did not want to meet with me that way. They wanted to communicate through the school board chair, and that was a huge mistake because the school board chair would filter the information, right? And so you don't want someone filtering your information. You want the information to go directly to board members without filtering. But the one strategy that I recommend, and probably one of the most powerful things that I did when I was a superintendent, was to develop a school board governance handbook. Fairfax County has one, and I think we may have a link to it that you can get following this meeting. But theirs is called a Strategic Governance Manual, and it did so much to help the board organize its work in a way that was very efficient, very meaningful, that produced win-win opportunities for us. I share with my board that, there's this circle of accountability that starts with the superintendent and goes through the staff and even the community, but the board has to close that circle with self-accountability. And so in developing this manual, not only did it clearly define and help explain for them their policies and regulations, but protocols. So for example, board members needed to know, what do you do when you get contacted by a media member? Or how do you respond to constituent complaints? When does an issue need to go before the board for a policy review? Or when can a board member respond individually? All of those things were addressed in the handbook. And so if you decide to do this, and there are a number of publications out there on the market. If you just go to Amazon, you just Google school board governance handbook or governance manual, you can find lots of them. But I'd recommend that you not use that with your board, that you work with your board. It would be advisable to get an independent consultant to work with them and let them develop their handbook and vote it into policy. And then they are really holding themselves accountable for a document that they've created. And so again, a really good example is the one that was developed by Fairfax County.
Thank you. And we'll share that link too, just as a reminder for everybody that that's available. If you just to save you some time on research. Dr. Joel, I know you're huge on relationships over these 37 years. I think that if we ask people around you, they would say that really was the difference in your superintendency. So can you share a few strategies that you use to build that?
Thank you. And I just want to piggyback on Dr. Newsom and say that if you don't have those governing or operating principles, make that priority one for you and have it facilitated. Whenever I do that work, I will tell you, even board members that have been elected to disrupt, they recognize that if they're going to have any success, they're going to need to work with their superintendent. They're going to have to know what their lanes of responsibility are. So great point, Marcus. Thank you. So for me, the last 3 jobs that I had, I put 2 things on my contract that board members were gracious to add because they didn't think it cost them any money. One is they had to commit to 2 retreats per year. One was at the end of the year where we did a review. We did it in association with my summative evaluation. And then the second one was they had to agree to put collaboratively with me, put a performance-based evaluation scheme together, and they have. And then we had to review that over time. We communicate a lot with school board members. So from the Friday updates to one-on-ones, I do 2 one-on-ones per year. I bring my executive assistant with me. It's with one board member. They pick the restaurant, and we cover basically 3 things. How did the year go for you? What are the issues that you feel like we still need to address? And then I always want to know how you're getting along with my team, because my 4 associate superintendents all had a responsibility with that too. After the first year and my last 3 jobs, I said to the board, okay, now we got to do some presentations. We traveled together. We presented together. They turned into master presenters. They loved it. And we just made sure that we got our word out there as much as possible. That was state and as well as national. But the biggest thing were the retreats. Those were gold. We retreated for about 3 hours. We went to an offsite location. I always had it facilitated. And board members just really appreciated that communication. I meet with the board president and vice president twice a month for about an hour, hour and a half. I bring my team in for a little bit of that. We not only do agenda planning, but I always tell board presidents that I work with, you have to be really good at telling me what the pulse of the board is. And if there's a board member that's concerned about something, then we strategize. It's either me making a phone call, board presidents, because we elect good ones here in Lincoln, they would make that phone call. And we just didn't let problems or issues fester. And so I feel like that was a real strong point for us going forward. I think, the board always marked me up very highly on communication. They felt informed. We sent every single day, if we had to, anything that brought in sirens, that, if there was anything at a school, if there was any arrest that would, any major personnel issues, we never gave them the name. We didn't describe the circumstances for legal reasons, but we made sure that the board was not surprised. And I think that's one thing I'll close on, is you never want your board to ever be surprised, because when they are, they begin to think that you're not paying attention to the big things that are happening in your district.
That's right. And even more so, they're afraid you're hiding something or protecting someone. So great advice from both you and Dr. Newsom. Dr. Majette, it's always hard to go third because everybody uses all the, and then you're checking off all the things that you're doing already. Anything you'd like to add, though, that was not mentioned?
Yes, I will say something similar. I know, the weekly emails and things were mentioned, and I do the highlights, but I do make sure that I set our goals. So I call it weekly update, week ahead, but I set the goals that the team and I are going to be working on for that particular week. And of course, it's always aligned to our strategic plan and goals for the division. And so when I give them the weekly update, well, for the week ahead, I say, well, that's what we're working on. So when I do the weekly update portion of that, I list the things that we did or we were working on to get towards those goals. So that is an ongoing thing for them. Because general highlights, I send that all the time, and all of my members except one follows our social media, so they get the highlights of the division. But we do try to keep it centered around our goals. Similar, we do the 2 retreats a year, and that was like one of our actionable steps to make sure that we keep strategic plan and our goals for the divisions at the forefront. And I guess one other thing similar to what Dr. Joel had mentioned, definitely making sure our members aren't blindsided. Again, small communities, so I will send out a text message and it'll be something simple. Hey, rescue was called to the high school. I just don't want them to find out when they go to the local food line or wherever that they go that this is something that was happening there. And I don't want them waiting on it, looking at an email hours later. They can get that immediate feedback with me, and meet with my chair every week. But I actually communicate in some capacity with all of my board members. There are 5 of them every week, whether it's via phone, in person, or text. So we keep that regular communication going. And we do have our board committee meetings, and we do those a minimum of once a month, but most of the time they are about twice a month to keep everybody informed.
Awesome. Thank you. Our last question as a group, and then we're gonna, Dr. Joel kind of mentioned some of the things he was putting in his contracts, and he had the opportunity even at the same district to do multiple contracts. So I'm going to quickly run through this one just so we have a little time to spend with Micah on the fact that you guys have new boards elected and new members of your boards that are changing things, and your contracts as you are renewing them need to be updated. So we're going to save a little time after this question to talk a little bit about that. But I do want to pull some of the panelists into this question just to share some of the signs where a school district leader may be losing, support of the board. How do you know, right? What are some of the things to look for? So Dr. Joel, do you mind just a few things that you saw?
Yep. So I got a phone call a couple of weeks ago from superintendent in another state, and here's what he said. The board went into closed session and asked me not to be in there. And he said, what do I do? And I said, get your resume updated, because there's something going on. Unless you know the issue is specific and you're okay with it, it's time to be thinking about it. When board members become argumentative, when all of a sudden they start voting no on things that they ordinarily supported, when they stop showing up and being proactive participants in committee meetings, those are all really bad signs. And one of the things that I always suggest is do your level best to try to reconnect with them, because they could be dealing with personal issues. They could be dealing with, political issues. But, at some point, you've got to enlist the rest of your school board, your board leadership, president and vice president, to help you address the issues that these folks are concerned about. It's very, very bad for a superintendent when a supporter goes rogue, because it means that, ultimately things are going to get much, much tougher for the superintendent.
Yeah, for sure. Dr. Majette, anything you'd like to share when it comes to just signs that you've seen when definitely you feel like you're losing some support from your board?
Luckily, I haven't been there, but I have been in divisions when this is happening, and I would just assume the same thing, being disagreeable for the sake of being disagreeable. But I think going back to, I know I said every rumor doesn't have to be listened to, but that's probably one of those rumors that you would want to listen to, because sometimes that person who is disgruntled, for example, I have one member that we're back together now, but we've had some disconnect at times. And oftentimes those individuals will speak to the community first about what their concerns are before they speak to you. So that may be one of those rumors, if you hear, that it should pique your interest enough to listen to.
Thank you. Dr. Newsome, anything to add to that?
Yes, I think this is probably one of the most important questions you've asked. Unfortunately, I've counseled too many superintendents who called me when it was too late. The board members had already given up their support. And so it's important to be able to start to read these signs early on. And I hope Michael will have an opportunity to talk to you about some things that you can have in your contract that will provide a degree of support if you ever come to this point. But I've also shared with K-12 Insight a list that I put together called 15 signs that you may be losing your board or you're about to get fired. And so without me going over all 15, you'll be able to get that. But a few things have already been said. Your board members start to micromanage you. They start to become distant. They start to ask for information in a manner that they know that you can't respond in the time frame that they provided for you. Your evaluations are mediocre. And then sometimes the board can see in you when you are burned out. when you were frustrated, and then that may cause them to start to become distant. And oftentimes your gut will tell you that there's something wrong and you need to listen to your gut. And the final thing I would say is typically the school board that hires you is typically going to be supportive unless there's some major issue or breach. But it's when there's an election and there's a new school board that did not hire you. Pay very close attention to the candidates that are running for election. I'd been superintendent in Chesterfield for 9 years with 3 different school boards. And then going into my 10th year, I was looking at the candidates for election. And I said, I would not be able to lead if those guys get elected. And so before the election, I announced my retirement would come at the end of the year. And so I overlapped for 6 months with that board. And it was one of the wisest decisions that I'd made. Though it would have not have ended pretty had I stayed. And I think it was a real challenge for the next school board. I'm sorry, for the next superintendent. And so pay really close attention to the elections and what the candidates are saying.
Thank you. And you mentioned that you hope Micah would chime in, Dr. Newsome. I think this is a great place to pause for a minute and first, Micah, have you address the fact that the board is going rogue, or we just got through new elections where we are dealing with a board that was not the board when we came in. Talk to us a little bit about, first of all, when you start seeing those signs, and then also if you could, without me coming back in to ask you the second question, kind of go into the contracting strategies, right? For if you're currently in a tenure right now and you're going to renew a contract or looking to renew, or you see yourself in a situation where having these closed door meetings or starting to vote against you. Talk to us a little bit, Micah, about these contract negotiations and, how do we as superintendents protect ourselves, would be coming from the superintendent side. I'm still the chief customer officer. I haven't become a superintendent yet.
Yeah, I'll hit a couple points here. I mean, I think the rest of the panelists have talked about signs that your board is starting to no longer support you. So I won't focus on that. I did want to go back to the previous question about good communication, just to hit one point, which is I would recommend that you establish with your board who it is that can consult with the legal counsel, with the board counsel. It will usually be the superintendent, right? And the superintendent can establish their own rules for the staff. And maybe it's only going to be the superintendent, maybe, it's assistant superintendents and others. I mean, depending on the size of the staff, the rules can be different, but it's a good rule for a superintendent to establish in the first place for the staff. And then I think the board should have its own rules about who contacts legal counsel. And you may need to prompt your boards to come up with that kind of rule. And what I've seen, or at least I should say what I think works best, is that there is one member of the board who's appointed for that purpose. Often it's the chair, but it doesn't have to be. And the point there is not that it's some kind of honor or something like that to talk to the council, just that it can be bad communication, and worse than that, if you have lots of board members contacting the council. And the reason is not only because you're just going to get different kinds of answers, or rather the board members are going to interpret the same answer differently, right? But now you've got individual board members getting individual pieces of legal advice, as opposed to the board getting legal advice. That just can get really confusing. It's not an issue if you've got the board counsel at a meeting and everyone's hearing it. But if there's a question that comes outside of a meeting, then again, I'd recommend that one person gets identified to ask the question and then brings the answer back. I've seen it go awry when individual members are asking the same question. They then come back, they think they've gotten different answers. That makes it seem like the legal counsel was giving different answers, but really it was just the same answer getting interpreted differently. So anyways, I think good communication means establishing one person from the board and one person likely from the staff to communicate with legal counsel. Often that's superintendent and chair, and they can do it together, of course. In terms of things we can do to kind of prevent the relationship from going bad, or if the relationship goes bad, making sure that you're covered, a lot of that is in the contract. The most important term I always think in a superintendent's contract is the termination clause. Basically, how can this contract end, and what happens if it does? And that can be an awkward thing to negotiate at the beginning of the relationship, because it means you're already looking to the end. I often think of these as prenuptial agreements, and in the same vein, it's kind of unpleasant to be thinking about the dissolution of the relationship when it's just getting started. But I think it's important. One way you can take the awkwardness out of that is to have the negotiations happening through council. I generally think it's important that the board chair and the superintendent are on the same page about what the contract is going to say, at least in terms of the big items. But you can have a lawyer doing some of the actual negotiations, and there's a good cop, bad cop element to that, right? If you've got something you want in the contract, but you don't want to ask for it, again, especially at the beginning of the relationship, you can ask the attorney to ask for it and just make it seem like that person is again the bad cop. In terms of the terms of the agreement themselves, as I said, I think the termination term is the most important, and even more narrowly within that, the termination without cause term. So if you do something or if unfortunately it's in the eye of the board, right? This is a circumstance where what the board thinks is going to govern, at least at the outset. If the board thinks that you have violated the agreement or done something unbecoming of a superintendent, then you can be terminated for cause. And there's really not much you can do about that other than kind of fighting it on the back end. But what ends up being more typical is that you are separated without cause. And that there's something you can do about that on the front end, which is ensuring that you've got a good severance term, meaning that you're going to continue to be paid even if you're separated. That is worth fighting for. I think when you're negotiating a contract, that you should think about what matters and be willing to put aside some things that that you care about, but they're not a top priority. I think the severance is usually a top priority. I have seen them as up to as much as 18 months, maybe even 2 years, but I think that's extremely rare. More typical is a year. At the very least, you should be getting 6 months. I think the thing you can do that's most protective of you is to ensure that you've got the severance that you need to get through one hiring cycle, so that if a separation comes at kind of an awkward time and it's too late to get hired for another job in the next school year, that's okay, because you've already got severance coming for the entirety of that school year. You can then put yourself into the hiring cycle for the next school year. Krista, I'll stop there because I know we only have a few minutes left and there may be some questions.
Thank you, Micah. And I think your best advice of just letting legal counsel be that voice. School boards, people in general are used to the attorney, being prepared to fight and battle those hard discussions. And it's still never, like my dad used to always tell me, never ever spank your children with your hand because you love them with your hand, right? It's like you want to make sure that the voice that's coming from you is really about why you wanted to be in this position as superintendent, but it is the job of your legal counsel to come and create everything that you need in your contract to protect you. So I know that we didn't have enough time for everybody. And if you do, Micah has made himself available if you have any questions following this webinar. And so you can definitely go through Dr. Newsom if you need a contact information there, if we haven't surprised, or Cindy or Isabella, if we haven't. But if there are more questions, just about you and your contract, that's super important. You don't have to put those in the chat. You can, connect with Micah directly if there's further questions after this webinar. Any additional questions, Isabella, that we need to address before we wrap up?
I haven't seen any questions come into the chat unless people have some they'd like to drop in right now. but if not,
This is
I
good because timing wise, this keeps
Yeah.
us right on track. If I don't want you to feel short, or if you do have a question that you didn't want to put in a public chat, you'll have an opportunity again to go through Dr. Newsome, and we can connect you with any of the panelists that are here today. And then also here you'll see a contact information for VAS to get any follow-up questions directly to them. And there's also a QR code we'd love for you to scan. We're going to send you this PowerPoint. So if you don't have your phone handy to quickly do this right now, we are sending you this entire PowerPoint in next week's newsletter. And so you'll have this, really helpful to find out what you love, what you want to hear more about. Was this helpful? So if you guys don't mind taking a few minutes when you get your newsletter and pop in. Thank you all for joining us. We at K-12 Insight, we live to make your lives easier. And so if there's anything we could ever do for you, please feel free to contact us. But more than anything, we'd like to thank you for what you do every day, because without you, especially in the environment in which you all are serving in this opportunity, we are forever grateful. So we appreciate that you took an hour to spend a time with us today, but more than ever, we appreciate what you do every day for our children. Thanks for joining us. And to all our panelists, thank you. We couldn't have done it without you.